Tensions are again rising in the Strait of Hormuz, where Iran says it has attacked 3 cargo ships in the critical shipping lane. State media report that Iran's Revolutionary Guards carried out the operation, seizing 2 vessels and escorting them to the Iranian coast. The escalation comes after U.S. President Donald Trump extended his country's ceasefire with Iran indefinitely Tuesday, just hours before it was set to expire. But the U.S. blockade of Iranian ports remains in place, with Tehran calling that an act of war and a violation of the ceasefire. And U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance has postponed a planned trip to Pakistan for a second round of peace talks, casting doubt on when negotiations will resume and when the strait might reopen safely. So, what is Canada's view of the conflict and what role could it play in the region? Joining me now is Foreign Affairs Minister Anita Anand. Minister Anand, thanks so much for being here. Appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.
So let's start first with your reaction to this latest escalation. What is Canada's response to this Iranian attack on 3 cargo ships in the Strait of Hormuz?
The most important position from a Canadian perspective that I would like to begin with is that we believe in freedom of navigation. We believe in the UN Convention of the Law of the Sea, and we believe that ships must pass through the Strait of Hormuz. Period.
And that is a position you've repeated over the past several weeks. When you were attending the G7 foreign ministers meeting in France, you'd said that any efforts to block shipments, energy shipments rather, as well as fertilizer and other commercial goods is completely unacceptable. This was before the United States imposed its naval blockade. So what is Canada's position on that blockade? Do you also view it as quote unquote completely unacceptable?
We believe that ships need to pass. And any hampering of the ability for ships to pass under the law of the sea and in terms of freedom of navigation is not acceptable.
Right. And have you communicated that to your counterpart?
Let's be clear that the importance of standing for international law is at the forefront of what we do every day. And certainly my team is in constant touch with the United States and my counterpart there.
And in terms of your direct contact with Secretary Rubio, when did that last take place, and what can you tell us about that conversation?
Secretary Rubio was in Paris when we met as G7 partners, and we had a lengthy discussion about the Middle East. But I want to take a step back and recognize that the situation is quite volatile in the region in terms not only of Iran and the Strait of Hormuz, but also Lebanon. Mm-hmm. And as we see negotiations progress, Canada's position is that we are hoping for a permanent ceasefire, a de-escalation in hostilities, and that this ceasefire will occur not only in terms of Iran, but also in terms of Lebanon. The human suffering and the civilian infrastructure that has been consistently attacked across the region needs to cease.
Canada has already said that it's ready to help secure the strait once there is a ceasefire. There is a ceasefire in place right now, tenuous as it may be. It's been extended indefinitely. Does that meet the threshold for Canada contributing any efforts to providing safety in the strait? Is that something that Canada has offered?
So to be clear, Minister McGuinty has said, and I agree with him on this, that there will be the opportunity for Canada to step forward in terms of aid once a permanent ceasefire is in place. And he has mentioned demining expertise, for example. In addition, what I'm doing from a foreign affairs perspective in advance of a permanent ceasefire is the diplomacy that underpins much of that pragmatic assistance. For example, I am in constant communication with Canada's partners in the Gulf region, advocating for the continued support for the region, including the necessary stability, a reduction in the tensions and the need for de-escalation, as well as the protection of civilians and civilian infrastructure. That's the work that we are doing every day in diplomacy, bringing parties to the table, having the conversation of the need to support Gulf states at this time. I will be traveling to the region again shortly, and indeed was in touch with some of my counterparts yesterday.
And those are all worthwhile goals, I think we can all agree. But what concrete, just to give Canadians a better sense of what Canada could offer, what specifically, what concretely does that look like?
As I mentioned, once a permanent ceasefire is in place, Canada will be in a position to put forward assistance, for example, in the cyber area, in demining expertise, and the like. And that is largely within the purview of the Minister of National Defense. The complementary work that Foreign Affairs is doing, and I as Minister, is happening now. The concrete deliverables are with our counterparts from a unity perspective, from a cooperation perspective. How do we ensure that we're supporting humanitarian causes? How do we ensure that we're supporting international law? How do we ensure that we are pragmatically standing for the stability of states in the Gulf? And we do that in a number of ways. We've issued a number of joint declarations or statements, as we did after the G7 in Paris recently. We also do that through joint calls and conversation. We've had one of those recently led by Secretary Cooper of the UK, where we spoke about the Strait of Hormuz and the need to protect freedom of navigation. Much that is accomplished in the world happens when parties come together and advocate for similar positions. That's exactly what Canada continues to do.
And how optimistic are you that there will be a second round of talks in Islamabad? Obviously, we're seeing a lot of back and forth. There's a lot of uncertainty. What can you tell Canadians in terms of what you're thinking will happen with those talks?
So I'm in frequent touch with my counterpart, Senator Ishaq Dar, in Pakistan. We spoke just a couple of days ago, and we speak every couple of days on this very topic. And the view from the Pakistani standpoint is that the parties are very much involved in ascertaining when continued negotiations can occur. We refer to those as Islamabad 2. But of course, Canada's position, let's bring it back to Canada's position, is to see a ceasefire not only in Iran, but also in Lebanon, having the protection of humanitarian lives and causes, as well as the upholding of international law, is at the forefront of our agenda.
You spoke of Lebanon, and unfortunately, one of the casualties of this conflict is a 38-year-old Canadian who was shot and killed by an Israeli drone in Lebanon. Israel has promised an investigation. How confident, what reassurances have you received from the Israeli government that that investigation will be full and transparent as you expect?
Well, first, I'd like to extend my condolences to the family of the Canadian citizen. And I would also indicate that my officials met with the Israeli ambassador and requested a full and transparent investigation. And my understanding is that the Israeli embassy has committed to undertaking that investigation, and now that is a process that we are following, and we look forward to the details, including the fullness and transparency of the investigation, but also the timeline for it.
On another topic, I know that Minister LeBlanc is the lead on Canada-US trade relations, but I do want to get your view on the reporting we're getting today from Radio-Canada and CBC, according to which the Trump administration is now demanding further concessions from Canada before formal talks actually begin formally. You said today that simply being at the table is progress in itself, but doesn't that seem like an awfully low bar if that's what Canadians should be satisfied with right now?
Well, I'd like to put some context on the table. First, more than 80% of our trade with the United States is operating tariff-free. Second, remaining at the table is necessary for negotiations to continue and unfold, and that's exactly what Minister LeBlanc and Janice Charette and Ambassador Weissman are doing every day. And thirdly, we are wasting no time in ensuring that we have other supply chains and other trading agreements in play for Canadian businesses. For example, over the past 6 months, more than 12 trade agreements have been signed over 4 continents. And so we are accomplishing multiple objectives at the same time, including ensuring that we remain at the table for Canada-US trade negotiations.
I know my time with you is running out, but very quickly, one last question. In his video address to Canadians that went out on Sunday, the Prime Minister again doubled down on this notion that our once strong ties with the United States, which were once seen as a strength, are now a weakness. How helpful is that kind of language at this point, with those talks underway, with CUSMA set to be renewed, hopefully renewed in some way or form? How helpful is that at this point?
Well, there is no question that the global trading order has become completely rewired as a result of countries' retreat towards protectionism, and that includes the United States. That is within their sovereign right to undertake. At the same time, we have to be realistic about what Canada needs to do as we double non-US trade over the next 10 years. The people-to-people ties between Canada and the United States remain strong, and the economic ties as well continue. Every relationship has hills and valleys. As we navigate this very complex environment, we will also diversify our trading relationships so that Canadians and Canadian businesses have additional international opportunities. And securing $71 billion in foreign direct investment from the UAE, for example, is one example of the way in which Canada is not only diversifying trade relationships, but attracting investment. And the Prime Minister has announced an investment summit here in 2026. That is in Canada in 2026. Another example of how the world continues to say, we want more Canada. We are interested in Canada and participating with Canada and the Canadian economy. And that is exactly the message I hear when I'm sitting at the table in foreign jurisdictions around the world.
Foreign Affairs Minister Anita Anand, thanks very much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.